Stop me if you've heard this before. John James Moneybags was born on a dark and stormy night in a dingy alley, never to know his parents. He learned to read by digging through the trash for newspapers to recycle so he could afford a few crumbs of bread every other day. By age 8, he shoveled manure and swept chimneys while moonlighting as an attraction at the local sideshow. At 13, he managed to survive a cage death match to get hired for a temp mailroom job at the Monopoly Corporation. There, working 22 hours a day, he rose through the ranks to become the executive vice president of tactical nuclear finance, and eventually, a multimillionaire who writes books and gives motivational speeches for 5-figure fees. And if he can do it, then you can too. Conventional wisdom says that we grew up hearing stories like this since the turn of the last century because the ultra-wealthy want us to be temporary, embarrassed millionaires, to borrow from John Steinbeck, instead of realizing that it's just not possible for all of us to be living in the lap of luxury under our current system and incentive structure. Workers, who know that a lot of promises they hear are hollow, asking for their fair share, or Cthulhu forbid, actually have a meaningful equity stake in the companies for which they work, is bad for the kinds of profits today's investors demand, especially today when they've become a bit more insistent on their double-digit growth.
Where's my money? You gonna give me my money? Where's my money, man?
And for the purposes of this, when I say workers, I mean that if daddy's or granddaddy's trust fund won't pay your bills and mom isn't on the board or isn't an executive of your employer, you're a worker. Basically, if you don't know if you're labor or capital, just ask yourself, do you have to make money to have a roof over your head and food in your fridge, or do you already kinda have it? We're not talking about a hardworking millionaire who, after decades of toil, smart savings, and disciplined investing, is worth $1 million, or 2, or even 10. That was impressive in the last millennium. Decades of inflation and the biggest stock market rallies in history made millionaires almost garden variety, and there are 58 million of them around the world at this point. In many parts of the world, you could be a millionaire on paper because your home is worth so much and still struggling to make ends meet. No, we're talking about dynastic, multi-generational wealth that compares to the GDP of cities and states, if not entire countries. The kind of wealth that can only be described as ostentatious, obnoxious, or absurd. The kind of wealth only 2,781 people on Earth now possess, or roughly 1 in 4 million. Even if your net worth is a 7-digit number, you are statistically closer to sleeping in your car than you are to them. So with that, let's return to the tale of John James Moneybags. These kinds of stories are downright foundational when it comes to framing discussions about wealth, greed, and the social contract. The goal? To narrow the perception gap between those with Scrooge McDucking volts of gold and you. When people are being asked to support tax hikes on the wealthy, these stories are thrown out with a bunch of numbers designed to make you think that you're either just under the line of being wealthy or well on your way to what sounds like wealth, and that getting this wealth is as easy as just hustling hard enough. You're supposed to listen to these inspirational stories and think, well, hold on there a second. At the rate I'm going, I could be rich in 2 to 5 years. And then all these freeloaders are going to take the money that I would have worked so hard to make. Well, I definitely don't want to vote against me in 5 years. If anything, I want to give my future self a tax cut when I do make it. And you absolutely think that you will make it because look at John over there. All you hear about is how the only difference between you and the wealthy is that they just work really hard. That they're hard-scrabble brawlers who refuse to take no for an answer or settle for less. Just like you. Or at least just like how you want to be. And there's an entire ecosystem of podcasts, self-help books, life coaches, and motivational speakers whose job it is to tell you that if you're working hard and still aren't swimming in Benjamins, you're the problem. And they can help. For a fee, of course. So, obviously, it's all just aspirational, predatory, self-serving propaganda, right? No way do the 0.01%, many of whom actually come from money and have more than enough connections to maintain their wealth, actually believe that they're scrappy strivers with working class roots who pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right? Well, according to studies examining their attitudes about the world around them and their own lives, they absolutely bought their own mythology hook, line, and sinker. Now, yes, plenty of them did have what we'd undeniably call working class roots, but they're often a generation or two removed from having to worry about choosing between rent and groceries. Remember all these how I paid off my $700,000 in student loans in 18 months and bought a house and you can too stories? And how if you read them at least halfway through after things like, I only ate rice, beans, and convenience store ramen as a special treat, and I only watched Hulu and Netflix with the ads, and I only went out once every 4 months at most, is inevitably something like, well, my dad gave me a 6-figure job at his company, or I lived in my aunt's vacation home rent-free for 2 years. And you know what? Good for them. If your family can help you in life, you should absolutely take them up on it. I'm not going to sit here and shame people for getting help from the very people who are supposed to be helping them. But if your family can help you with things that are simply not achievable for 9 out of 10 people, like a free house in which to live for years, or a high-paying job straight out of college, pretending that anyone can achieve the same things you can if they just want it hard enough is absurd. And yet, this is how all these motivational myths are self-created. Because when we get enough money and enough power, even in a lab setting, even a little bit, and even when it's obvious that it's all due to a researcher's coin toss, not only do we tend to become less empathetic, we also often think that we're just plain smarter and more deserving of this newfound authority and wealth. The internal dialogue isn't, I had help and luck in my life, and I worked really long hours to capitalize on it, so here I am. It's now, I earned this. I did this. I made this. What is wrong with you that you can't? Are you just not as good as me? Maybe I'm just better than most people then. Even worse, we also start believing that we're more objectively correct than those around us. So, obviously, those who disagree just hate us because they ain't us. We also become more hypocritical, judging others more harshly for breaking rules than we would ourselves. We'll be even more angry with unfair offers than those without wealth and power, but then also offer to give up less in return. We'll have trouble with tasks that need us to put ourselves in someone else's shoes or see something from other points of view. All that mental bandwidth that we usually dedicate to maintaining our empathetic bonds with the rest of society has now been redirected to maintain and expand our new status and resources. To sum it all up, extreme wealth and power makes us numb and self-absorbed. And the more wealth and power we have without any checks or balances or accountability, the more disconnected from society we become.
I mean, it's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
Simply put, we can put to corporations ran by obnoxiously wealthy people doing things like denying millions access to healthcare, or laying off tens of thousands with no notice on a whim, or squeezing working stiffs dry while treating them as a replaceable thing, or their gluttonous pursuit of more money than 1,000 people can spend in their lifetimes, and no matter how many more billions they get, complaining this is just not enough, or how they turned tone-deaf, borderline worship of wealth and luxury, and by extension of those who have it, into an international pastime. They've effectively projected their values that having stacks on stacks on stacks makes you the smartest person in your room because, hey, if other people around you are so smart, where are their Lamborghinis and mansions and Gulfstream jets? We can call it evil all we want. We can explain why until we lose our voices. But the bottom line is that the plutocrat class simply cannot comprehend that so much of what they're doing is just plain wrong. They are utterly convinced that they're smarter, better, more correct about everything, and that if anything, the only thing they deserve is more. This is why billionaires like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are transitioning to oligarchs, the extremely wealthy with the access and resources to legally plunder an entire country. They genuinely and honestly in their hearts of hearts believe that they deserve it, that this is what they're owed by life, and they will never, ever be satisfied with what they have. And we can prove that very easily too. The wealthy are building doomsday bunkers to prepare for the collapse of civilization and worrying about how to stay rich through an apocalypse, even though they have more than enough money to pay for this collapse not to happen, with absolutely zero changes to their lifestyles whatsoever. When you're wondering how to avoid having your guards deem you expendable after the end of the world, just so you can exit stage down with all your money instead of, staying alive, you have a serious problem. The plutocracy are like hoarders, but instead of giant piles of garbage, it's money. And in the wake of the public's reaction to United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson's life suddenly classified as out of network, they've been absolutely stunned to find out that no, we generally don't admire them or aspire to be them, but that we very much actively despise them and think of them as parasitic. We're just nice to them because we have to be, so we don't starve. Their ever more comfortable bubble of wealth, access, gluttony, and delusion was just popped for a brief moment, and it's absolutely not computing that the real mood of the vast majority of the country they thought they had bought and paid for is
Ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Les aristocrates à la lanterne. Ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Les aristocrates, on les pendra.
Now, before anyone gets too carried away there, if you do a little reading on French history or just Google the Reign of Terror, you'll see that it didn't end well for literally anyone involved. But just as scientists can explain why the wealthy feel like we're so beneath them, they can also show why it does make sense that we feel so much resentment and have so little empathy in return. It all comes down to evolution and the core disconnect between the plutocracy and ordinary human beings that they've come to consider disposable. We're social creatures, and we're also hardwired to reject people who abuse the social contract. Even chimpanzee troops get rid of tyrannical leaders and hoarders who steal from the rest of the group. As their evolutionary cousins, we tend to engage in similar behaviors and reject the foundations of game theory on which the wealthy and powerful rely to justify their unfair behavior. In game theory, a framework used by economists to try and predict and explain individual and organizational decisions, literally anything is better than nothing. If there's a single positive, no matter how small, we should take the deal because we'd be better off, whether we're better off by 1 cent or $1 billion. We would still be getting more than we had. According to decades of research, however, if we get an insultingly bad deal, we will reject it, even if objectively we do get at least something out of it. Logically, we realize that the deal we have may be better than nothing, or at least doesn't leave us worse off. Emotionally and socially, however, we feel like we're being exploited and neglected, and if we just accept this treatment, things will only get worse. And this is the ultimate disconnect between the elites and the serfs. In the view of the wealthy and powerful, they're giving us products and services we may not have had before. They pay us and give us at least the pretense of choice by having us agree to writing in employment terms favorable to them, or waive our rights. And despite doing their best to avoid paying taxes, they still pay quite a bit. Which makes sense because they do quite literally have most of the money. The top 20% of earners get half of all the available income. Meanwhile, about half of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. If they paid even more than they already do in taxes, for fairness, they'd have to get on the dark web to see if selling a kidney will help both pay rent and the IRS. But as far as the wealthy are concerned, they did even more than their fair share and could have gotten away with treating us even worse. We, on the other hand, see their complete lack of empathy and are tired of their endless demands that we keep working harder and more for diminishing returns. In 1980, we were told that wealth trickles down, which is why the wealthy deserve massive tax cuts. But a study by the London School of Economics shows that the only thing that happens when you cut taxes for the wealthy and their businesses is that the net worth of the wealthy and their businesses soars into the stratosphere. In fact, the whole idea of supply-side economics was a fraud by economics crank Art Laffer, who drew a curve on a steakhouse napkin. And it's thanks to that napkin that we have an extra $30 trillion in debt and a crippling recession every decade, followed by a lavish $1 trillion bailout to the billionaire class. And now, with generative AI, as it's being pitched to businesses, it's been made abundantly clear that we're seen as a necessary evil at best, instead of the assets we keep being told we are at company town halls. Look, obviously, we knew those words were being said just to be polite, but now even that perfunctory politeness is gone. Instead, we're just getting naked contempt and disdain. And we're very concerned that those with the means and the money are just trying to see how much they can squeeze out of us until they hear bones snapping and blood squirting out of our orifices. And we're also afraid that at this point, they won't stop even then. That crazed by greed, which has now become a pathology, they'll wring us dry and demand that the government fixes us so they can keep profiting from us. And then if the government can't fix us, they will sell subscriptions to blood buckets and splints and demand that we drag ourselves to work, at the office, mind you, for collaboration purposes, so we can keep making them even wealthier. But you see, getting almost anything you need either automatically or with just a snap of your fingers and being surrounded by people who are either just like you or depend on you for survival and can't say no to your every whim will do that to a person. At some point, they simply cease to understand how anyone can feel anything other than admiration for them, much less see them as a threat. This is why they desperately want to retreat into their bubble and impose their will on us by edict, since democracy can put up roadblocks to their whims becoming law. Lately, they've been getting momentary tastes of the mood outside their compounds full of sycophants, assistants, and equally wealthy friends. And boy, oh boy, do they not like it. Or us. We're interfering with their grand plans by asking to be treated like human beings and allowed to profit off our work. So they're doing what in their minds is the only viable solution, trying to bring back a world order where the only acceptable purpose for us is to be small cogs in their grand machines and be goddamn thankful for the opportunity.